Hello and welcome to How to Fix It. A few Christmases ago, I looked at a Sherlock Holmes story because I had run out of easily accessible Christmas material, and I had hoped that we'd be getting back to Sherlock Holmes eventually since then. I actually picked up the entire collection of Sherlock Holmes from Amazon a month back, but since then, something has been bothering me. Much like Gallivant last year, there's something that I can't stop thinking about. The BBC's Sherlock series, starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Bilbo Dent. Martin Freeman, and written by the current showrunner of Doctor Who, Stephen Moffat, and my favorite audio master, Mark Gatiss. This past series is the final one, and it is also widely despised by the Sherlock fanbase. Now, whether it's down to the fact that Sherlock and John didn't get together romantically, or something else that I'll get into later, everyone hated it. But, much like my experience with Star Trek Beyond, I actually really enjoyed it. And I, up until watching it, wasn't really a fan of Sherlock, only having seen Series 1 and The Abominable Bride. Normally, I'd watch Series 2 and 3 so I could be knowledgeable enough about the subject, but I believe that this is a good thing. I want to look at Series 4 objectively. I want to see if the reason that it's hated is because it's an objectively bad story, or something else that's making everyone hate it. Is it worthy of carrying on the Sherlock Holmes legacy, or is it a crappy story? Let's find out. The review is on. The series picks up with Sherlock and Watson sent on a case to discover the cause of the mysterious death of a rich man's son, who was supposedly out of the country but found a week later dead in an exploded car. Turns out that the kid was going to surprise his parents but had a seizure in the car and sat there until a drunk driver rammed into it and it exploded. But Sherlock is more interested in the break-in that happened later, where a seemingly inconsequential bust of Margaret Thatcher was destroyed. And based on what I know about 20th century British history, I'd assume that a lot of people have a motive to do that. Eventually, it's discovered that the man who stole the bust was a former associate of Mary's, who, if you weren't aware, was an assassin and former member of a special ops unit contracted by the British government, where she was, as far as she knew, the only one to escape when they were betrayed by someone. An English woman, who the man, AJ, assumed was Mary, and so he went out for revenge on her. He escapes, and so Mary runs off to protect Watson and their infant daughter, who they named Rosie. Sherlock and Watson follow her, and AJ gets killed, leaving Sherlock and Watson to discover who the English woman was. Sherlock assumes that it's one of Mycroft's associates in the government, and as this goes on, Watson begins cheating on Mary with a woman he met on a bus, texting back and forth with her whenever Mary isn't around. It's eventually discovered that it wasn't who Sherlock thought it was after all. It was actually that woman's secretary, who had been engineering things from the background. Sherlock called Watson and Mary to come, and Mary got there first, and the secretary pulls a gun on Sherlock, firing at him, and Mary jumps in front of the bullet, as Watson runs in and she dies in his arms. This is that thing I was talking about that the people didn't like, the whole woman dying for male angst a la Alex DeWitt. Watson severs ties to Sherlock, blaming him for her death, and Mycroft receives a strange message and places a call to Sherringford, which is the name of a proposed eldest Holmes brother in Sherlock Holmes lore. The second episode starts with Watson hallucinating Mary still being there, while still being racked with guilt for cheating on her before she died. Sherlock is meanwhile strung out on heroin after being rejected by Watson. He's approached by a woman, Faith, whose father, Culverton Smith, is like the Bruce Wayne or Tony Stark of Britain, a well-known and loved philanthropist. She tells him that her father confessed something to her and several other people, but used an experimental memory-wiping drug to erase it, so he could have the catharsis of confessing. He said that he needs to kill someone. She doesn't remember who. She goes to Sherlock, and he wanders around the city with her, after not having left his flat for a week, so Mycroft begins tracking him, which Sherlock knows that he'll do, so he wanders around and spells the words "uck off." She disappears, and Sherlock figures out that it wasn't someone. It was anyone. Culverton Smith is a serial killer. 3 weeks later, a speeding car being chased by the cops crashes outside the house of Watson's therapist, and Mrs. Hudson gets out, having been given a free pass by Mycroft to retrieve Watson. Turns out that Sherlock went nuts and confronted Smith over social media about being a serial killer. This leads to them getting a private meeting with Smith, and they spend the day with him at his hospital, in a trippy set of scenes where Smith gets progressively darker until he takes them to his favorite room in the hospital, the morgue. While they're in there, Smith's daughter Faith shows up, but it's not the woman who came to Sherlock in his house, leading everyone to assume that Sherlock hallucinated the other Faith. Sherlock goes nuts and tries to stab Smith, but Watson stops him and then kicks the snot out of him for Mary's death. This gets Sherlock a stay in Smith's hospital for his injuries, and lo and behold, Smith is a killer and goes to kill Sherlock, only to be foiled because Watson left his cane in the room, which had a listening device in the handle, and so they heard the whole thing. We also learn that the entire scheme with the heroine was Mary's idea to get Sherlock and Watson back together, since she anticipated that her death would destroy Watson, so she left a DVD with instructions for Sherlock. Watson and Sherlock go back to their cases, and Watson goes to his therapist, who is revealed to not only be the fake Faith Smith and the woman that Watson cheated with from the bus, but also the fabled third Holmes sibling. Not a brother, but a sister, Euros. The third episode involves Sherlock, Mycroft, and Watson going to confront Euros, who Sherlock had forgotten existed because she hid Redbeard, his childhood dog, and wouldn't tell him where she hid him, causing his death, and so he repressed the memory. They go to Sherringford, a maximum security Black Ops type prison that Mycroft used to hide Euros, since she's a master manipulator. He gave her one gift a few years earlier, unsupervised time with Moriarty when he was alive, and after that she took over the entire prison from the inside out. She traps Sherlock, Watson, and Mycroft in a labyrinth of her own and Moriarty's design, forcing them to do terrible things, all the while a little girl in an airplane is set to crash if they can't talk her into landing it. At one point, Sherlock is forced to choose between killing Watson or killing Mycroft, and even though Mycroft tries to goad Sherlock into killing him because he knows that Sherlock and Watson will solve the case, Sherlock refuses and turns the gun on himself. This leads to Euros stepping up the game, and Sherlock awakens in his childhood home, while Watson is where Redbeard was buried, in a well, Buffalo Bill style. Though we don't get a scene with Euros dancing along to Q Lazarus's hit Goodbye Horses. We do get Moriarty singing along to Queen's I Wanna Break Free, though. The well is filling up, so Sherlock has to work fast, decoding Euros' song that she had sung when Redbeard was first hid when they were children, and Watson finds bones in the well. But, as we find out later, they aren't dog bones, they're human. Redbeard was one of Sherlock's childhood friends, and they used to play pirates together, hence the name that he associated with him when he repressed it. Sherlock is also rushing to figure out the mystery of the plane, and it all culminates in him realizing that the girl in the plane is Euros, and all she wanted was to play with Sherlock because as brilliant as she was in a plane compared to everyone else and felt alone. Watson is saved and Euros is sent back to jail. The episode and series ends with more of Mary's message on the DVD, where she speaks over a montage of Sherlock and Watson redecorating 221B and playing with Rosie. The story was interesting. The entire Moriarty back-to-life arc being orchestrated by a new Holmes sibling was a cool take on the Sherlock Holmes mythos, and having the sibling be wiped from Sherlock's memory due to trauma is also really cool. Plus, the story in the first episode, up to Mary's death, was interesting. I always like stories that start off as something else and then find the real story along the way. I have issues with episode 2, but everything with Euros in the second episode, her being not only Watson's infidelity but also the therapist and the fake daughter, was a twist that I did not see coming at all. The music and music cues are spot on, and while fridging Mary was a bad call in my book, they at least had her go down saving Sherlock's life. It's not like she was killed by Euros to get at Sherlock or Watson. She went down saving a life, and even though it was the life of a drug addict who is apparently this close to falling back off the wagon, it still felt like a heroic sacrifice. Since we're on to specific episodes, Toby Jones made a very effective villain as Culverton Smith, though I expected that of him considering his appearances as Arnim Zola in the Marvel Cinematic Captain America movies, and as the Dream Lord in Doctor Who. I mean, Smith was just so charismatic and so goddamn crazy that I was actually more interested in him than the other characters. The third episode was crazy, and it was amazing. I loved it. It was exactly what I wanted in a finale. Edge of my seat excitement. It was balls to the wall insanity, and even though it had a higher death toll than I usually like, it was exciting, and I was more engaged with it than I had been with the entirety of Series 1. The culmination of not only the Moriarty return arc, but also the entire arc of Series 4 with Euros manipulating everything Puppet Master style was brilliant. I was eagerly awaiting the next installment once the previous one ended. And the acting was superb all around, though I want to give special praise to both Amanda Abington and Sean Brooke. Especially Brooke, considering that she was playing multiple parts, and I didn't realize that she was until the big reveal at the end of The Lying Detective. I do also have to give praise to the writing. Moffat and Gatiss have never disappointed me aside from Series 8 of Doctor Who, and I was quite impressed with this final outing of theirs. We'll be right back. And we're back. Mary's death was a crappy move. While I agree that it worked narratively, it's too often that we get that trope. There were other ways to go about it, which I'll get to later. And though I'd only seen Mary in one other episode before that, I liked her. I liked her more than I liked Sherlock. Can we just get a show about her adventures as an assassin? What was I talking about? Oh, right. Other than that, the first episode was solid. The second episode, on the other hand, didn't make any goddamn sense. Admittedly, I watched it while hopped up on cold medicine, but I watched it with another person, and they didn't know what the hell was going on either. With Sherlock being on heroin for a good portion, and the rest of it being all weird flashbacks and stuff, it was a little much. I prefer my detective shows to be straightforward. I don't really have any major problems with the third episode. I liked it. If I had one thing I didn't like, it would probably be for why Mycroft was so damn negligent with Euros. He gave her unsupervised time with Moriarty? She's a master manipulator and you gave her someone of equal caliber? It's a shock they didn't destroy the world together. Then again, since Mycroft is played by Mark Gatiss, maybe it was the Unbound Master causing a ruckus to get the Doctor's attention again. Though I feel like that worked in the narrative, if the story hadn't been so good, that would have been a little too much disbelief to suspend. Some general problems that I have with Sherlock, though, are how I can't predict the ending, like with CBS's Elementary. If you don't know, I love Elementary, and one of my favorite things is watching it and predicting which character we saw early on is the true killer, even though most of the time it ends up being big business. But that's a flaw with the show in general and not this specific series. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of bad to say about this one. First and foremost, I wouldn't have killed Mary off. Maybe instead of Mary getting killed, she finds out about Watson's infidelity and leaves him, taking the baby, and Watson blames Sherlock for why he left her, and that's why they split. Then, Sherlock does his thing in the second episode on his own accord to get his best friend back from his depression. Then, at the end of the third episode, Mary finds out that it was Euros manipulating him to cheat to drive her machinations, and the series ends with both Sherlock and Watson back together, and Mary and John back together, and there's no women in refrigerators. Though, to be honest, other than that, I don't have any major problems to fix aside from making The Lying Detective easier to understand, since I was lost for most of it. I honestly don't think that, speaking objectively, it was bad. I think it might be one of the best series of television that I've ever seen. As a non-fan, it made me want to watch and kept me engaged, and that's what's important when it comes to TV. Maybe the culmination of the build-up that you wanted didn't happen, but Series 4 was a wild ride, and I don't think that that is a flawed assessment. And that was Sherlock Series 4. Was it bad? Objectively, no. I have no stake in Sherlock or its various build-ups and fan theories and whatever, and as 3.5 hours of television, Series 4 was brilliant. A great story, an interesting take on the mythos, which is, at least in my opinion, what should be the goal of every Sherlock Holmes adaptation. And overall, a good set of episodes featuring compelling characters, brilliant actors, and a fitting end to Sherlock and Watson's adventures. It was amazing. It had everything I look for in a final season, including a sense of finality. It could continue, which it will, since Sherlock Holmes is ever present in various forms, but it's also the end. The fact that I had no investment in it as a final season only made me like it more. Sherlock might not be my cup of tea, but Series 4 has definitely made me reconsider that, and maybe I'll go back and watch Series 2 and 3 eventually. But nothing is ever going to trump Series 4 in my book. Naturally, this was polarizing, so if you have a different view of the series, especially as a Sherlock fan, let me know in the comments, because I am genuinely interested in the other side of the argument. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of how to fix it, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time. Maverick, it's been a while since you dropped in. What's going on? Oh, you know, a little of this, a little of that, a lot of attempting to track down Mike Sano's double in The Man in Black. Scarab and I have been putting in a lot of overtime on this one. I'm sure. I've been trying to do my part, but until he shows up again, there's not much I can do. Anyway, is Mike Sano around? I need to talk to him. Oh, he's in the new lab. Iota, tell Mike Sano to get out here. Aye, sir. Ah, Maverick. Nice to see you. Listen, Michael, I hope you don't mind, but I need to talk with him in private. Is it about his double? Something personal? You could say that. I hate to do this. Oh, no problem. I've got stuff to do upstairs anyway. Can anyone hear us? Nope. I've got a communications dampener on my handheld. Not even Iota can hear us. I take it you haven't told him yet. I've been trying. It's just not the right time. Sooner or later you're going to have to tell him. I will. But because it was the result of something that he built, I don't want to tell him until I have a solution. I don't want him to feel guilty. That reminds me, did you get my last transmission? I did, and I gave it to the lab boys. They told me that it could work, but it would take a year of testing to ensure safety. Well, I don't have a year. I'll have to go forward with it anyway. You're sure that there's no other way? It's extremely risky. Unfortunately not. Here's the data stick that the lab boys gave me. It should have everything you need to make it work, plus some intel that Scarab and I got over Christmas looking for your double. Why's that on there? I don't like lying to him. I told him that I brought intel, and that's what I brought. Thank you. With any luck, this will all be over soon.